So he cut taxes and sparked the investment boom. So they think it's going to do the same thing here, but the problem is that taxes aren't high, 35%, go from 35% to 20%. Is it really going to spark an investment boom? Secondly, they want to get to encourage businesses to invest. They're already hoarding, after 8 years of stimulus from the Federal Reserve and Obama administration, they're already hoarding about $1.8 trillion, these corporations. So if they were going to invest it, they would have done it already. They almost like they're bidding against yourself. And succinctly, the way I would describe Trump's tax plan, this is practically Barack Obama's third term. If you look at just President Obama's policies. He gave bailouts to these corporations. He and the Federal Reserve lowered interest rates to spike asset prices. They helped these corporations, I guess, to put assets on their balance sheets and hope rising tides would lift all boats. Constantly kept us at war. We were always at war. There was always a boogeyman out there to keep us distracted from what's going on here, whether it's terrorism or something. And always hanging around investment bankers. Always hanging around Goldman Sachs. And a lot of what happened during the financial crisis actually happened in the 1930s. This is nothing new. So FDR and these guys broke these banks up and said, no, never again will you be allowed to bet your own capital and take this amount of risk. And so, make a long story short, so Trump seems like he's kind of like taking Obama's playbook. He's cut taxes for these corporations. So look, I'm putting assets on people's balance sheets. As soon as he cut taxes, the stock market went up. He wanted credit for putting assets on people's balance sheets. He's not necessarily talking about going to war, but he's not de-escalating anything. Like when you talk about North Korea, he purposely inflames the situation. When this guy is testing missiles, because he's afraid that if he doesn't have a nuclear bomb, that we may attack him and assassinate him like we did Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein. So Trump stokes it. He doesn't de-escalate, he stokes it. And he's always hanging around investment bankers. Always got them as advisors. And we know these bankers are going to do what's best for them, not best for the country. So to me, this is Obama's third term. And the tax cut, I don't think it's very popular locally. I think we'll see if the politicians in Washington, the Republicans, when they go run for office next year or in 2019, we'll see if they get reelected. If the tax cut is so unpopular that they don't get reelected, because it wasn't really like it was kind of like partisan. It was just kind of like, we're going to do this, and they didn't really get the Democrats input.
Do we have any comments from the floor?
Yeah, if we were to use your analogy, Baker, about this being some kind of scientific, what do you call it,
Science fiction.
Is it possible for this kind of thing to happen and the president to have any real meaningful role? Is he not, President Obama, Trump, Reagan, are they not all puppets that corporations are using to do damage to citizens?
Well, I'm not going to say. Well, as far as President Obama is concerned, when he first was running for office, and it was like he was like a front runner. And as an older African American gentleman said something to me at the time, I didn't really get what he was saying. He said, "Something's supposed to be going on with this guy. He was having some big money people behind him. He just comes out of nowhere. Never heard of this guy. Never heard of him." And I thought, like, why is he hating on Obama? So, and then after years went on, I'm like, well, you think about it, like, you have African Americans place attributes onto President Obama that we can't prove. I don't know President Obama. I don't know a black person who can, I can't vouch for one. I don't know an African American who say, I went to high school with this guy, he's cool. Like, he just came out of the ether. And then when towards the beginning, end of his first term, I started thinking about what the older guy had said. Like, whoa, it started sinking in. This guy comes out of nowhere, no backstory. He didn't have no backstory. Not saying anything wrong with it. Like, how I would describe it is like this. When I was in college, there was a group called Milli Vanilli, a music group. I'm laying in bed in college in my dorm room by myself. I'm channel surfing, I'm watching BET and MTV, and these guys are on stage, they got like 20,000 women screaming at them. And they're dancing real funny, they got dreadlocks, and they have funny accents. I'm pissed, you know what I'm saying? So, and one that really pissed me off was a girl I liked who liked Milli Vanilli. And she would tell me, they're so cute. She would tell me that. And I'm like, why are you telling me this? And so, the thing about Milli Vanilli, they had no backstory. Because usually when these guys get to a certain level, you hear about the talent shows they won. They've been in 3 bands already that failed. Never, they never make it on the first band. They usually been through 2 or 3 bands. They won the county fair. They won all kinds of high school contests. You didn't hear that about Milli Vanilli. And so one day I told her and her girlfriends, guys are frauds. They're probably from Des Moines, Iowa, from someplace. Those guys, those accents are fake. They're probably from Des Moines, Iowa. Those dreads are fake. And one of her girlfriends, who I did not like, and so I had to be nice to her and her girlfriend, which is not my personality, by the way. And her girlfriend says, you're just jealous. I thought I was going to pass out. Because I couldn't take this. You know what I'm saying? I had to take it. You get jealous of them. And so a couple years after, as I graduated college, I'm driving down the highway. It comes across the radio. Milli Vanilli had been lip syncing. I almost had a car accident. Stopped, pulled off the side of the road, went to a payphone. There was no cell phones back then. I went to a payphone, called that girl. Said, I told you those guys were from Des Moines, Iowa. They were lip syncing the whole time. So it's what Obama reminds me. It's like he has no backstory. And so somebody took Milli Vanilli. It was like perfect. It was like they came out of it's like a central casting. Perfect. They were good looking. They had accents. They were regionalist. When I said regionalist, you couldn't tie them to a particular place because everybody, people from Europe liked them, people from America, Asia, everybody liked them. Men liked them, women liked them, black women liked them, white women liked them. It was like the perfect, like right out of the central casting. And somebody packaged these guys and sold it to the country. Somebody packaged Barack Obama, very good speaker. He's African American, so black folks gonna go for it. But with no backstory.
Okay.
And then he printed.
Let me get it out. Let's do it down.
Okay. I'm saying no backstory. I mean, like,
there is that's.
But I'm saying it's like a junior singer that comes out of the ether. We never heard of him. And then when we look back,
The DNC, remember the part?
Right, he printed.
He was able to speak.
Right, he spoke out.
Right, prior to that, I mean, he does have a backstory, he does have a history based on, I'm just talking about, what was the book, his book.
Right.
Okay, so, maybe unlike the autobiography of Malcolm X, did he write his own book? But that history, that narrative, is that a false narrative?
No. When I say a backstory, I mean a backstory of doing
And politics?
Of doing these. It just seemed like it just came out of nowhere. And then he printed money and bailed out these banks.
Okay.
And those are just the facts. Just the facts. I'm not saying he's a puppet. It's just the facts. He printed money and bailed out these banks. And I go back to the comment the older African American said. And the reason I say that because anybody who's been where I've been before me, I always listen. I never speak. When an older African American person speaks, I always listen. I went back to what this guy was saying. This guy just came out of nowhere. I mean, I'm being facetious a lot. I'm being facetious, but he printed money and gave it to his donors. And we need to be honest with ourselves. That's why we have this panel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a politician. I don't care about Democrats or Republicans. I don't care about black politicians or white politicians. But the Democrats are slaves to their donors. They've been slaves to their donors for years. And they have to, those are the facts. And they need to come clean with the American public. Instead of talking about Trump and Russia and talk about racism, got Trump, like they need to become clean with the public that they've been slaves to their donors and they've been printing money and serving their donors and not necessarily, that's why, and these populist messages, Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders had a populist message that resonated with the people. Donald Trump, like he's abandoned his populist message. I think he's abandoned his populist message and he's kind of taken on, again, this is Obama's third term, but you look around the world, Nigel Farage in the UK, you see the UK leaving the EU. That's why they leave. Because these politicians have all followed the Federal Reserve and President Obama's playbook. They printed money, spiked asset prices for the benefit of hedge fund managers, private equity firms, Walton investment banks, and the people in Europe saying, we're tired of this. We've had enough of it, and that's why they left the EU. They're mad at David Cameron. The guy who was head of the UK, David Cameron, after they left the EU, he has left public office. So these policies have been replicated around the world. This unusual, I spoke about this unconventional policy of spiking asset prices. We know who owns the assets, and they have been picking the winners. Now, I'm not saying it's bad, good, or nothing. I'm saying just the facts. Just the facts. But the Milli Vanilli reference was kind of trite, but I'm saying you kind of get where I'm coming from.
I do.
I think that I do understand to some degree what you mean by that President Obama has, you know, no backstory. Maybe that's a bit harsh, but the truth about it is that his rise to power is a phenomenal story. You don't usually find somebody come out of Harvard and get a $1 million book deal. Even, you know, as waspy guys, as white as, you know, from wealthy families, don't usually come out of Harvard and get such a deal. It just doesn't happen. You don't usually spend a couple of years in the Senate and get to become president. That's kind of,
Well,
you know, extraordinary.
not that you. Not of that you.
Right. Well, I mean, none of the white guys, even the white guys don't think like that. You know what I mean? Let's be honest about it. Well, okay, so Jeff, to some degree, Jeff did. But it's unusual. And I think that's what, you know, and the idea is that, you know, he had been selected and he had been packaged and he was well sold. You know, and the circumstances at the time he ran for office were just perfect. You know, the economy was collapsing, had collapsed, and you know, they need somebody special, and he fit the bill.
Okay, can I ask you a question right now?
Yes.
So, right, when you speak that's basically suggesting a puppet master. Who's the puppet master?
The capital class.
Okay.
There's no doubt about that. That's true. The class of capital. Yes, please.
I want to add a caveat to what you said, because the way the Federal Reserve is set up, it's a consortium of private banks. Okay, so basically, the thing that adds salt to the wound, as what you were saying, is that when the bank said we need money, the government says, well, we don't have any money. So they said, the banks, we'll print the money and lend it to you so you can give it to us. That's what happened.
Wow.
So if we really have to look at that mechanism, because the central bank prints money, it's paper. It doesn't mean, I don't agree that it should be gold. What I believe is that it shouldn't be in the private hands of people to make a profit for printing money. So if I lend you $1 and I say it's 10% interest, I just print the thing that's $1. It says there, you have to take it, it's legal tender. So you're going to pay me $1.10 next year. The whole $1.10 is profit, because there wasn't $1, it wasn't somebody's grandmother's savings.
Right.
So that's even worse than, because that's what happened. And when those debts, they're forever. They'll lend us the money to pay the interest payment. So it is the banking cartel.
Right.
So the nuance I'm trying to make is that with President Trump ran on a populist message. He has abandoned his message. And we can say this is Obama's third term because it's important, because as African Americans, when we attacked we were silent for 8 years. Silent, never said a word. Never said a word. And now when we attack Donald Trump's policies, he can always go back and say,
It was blame the other guy.
right, it's smart. What he's done is like abandoning popular message and just kind of gone this almost like a safe route, almost like they with the football team when they do the sort of coverage they use when they get a big lead. He's copied Obama's He's copied Obama's playbook. So now when you say something about his policies, he's going to go back and say, look what Obama did.
Okay, let me ask this question then. Okay. Since we're here and it's a grassroots situation, and basically you're saying that there's a lot of sleight of hand and deceptions going on, just so those 2%ers, right, can continue to profit greatly, right?
Control.
So what is it that we can do as a community, as a people, as an individual, as a collective, to try to somehow leverage our way into getting that which we actually need? Is that a fair
Anybody
question?
in the audience
It's a fair question.
want a response, comment, support, suggestions? All right.
Yes. Adam Smith said, let business do as they wish. The citizenry must do as we must. We must shut them down.
How do we do that?
We shut them down by cutting down on things that we consume. We have big consumers. The corporations can't produce if we're not giving them the incentive to produce. And we must become more efficient in our work as well. If we stop working, we don't want to work. We want to get paid. We want a job. We don't want to work.
Okay.
I've seen it from my very eyes. Corporations do not want to do outsourcing. But people who work in these plants, including IBM, were determined not to work productively. So when the white shirts came in and saw that the numbers had went up, but later to find out the numbers went up because there was an incentive for the numbers to go up among the workers. The workers said, no, we're not doing it because the white shirts came in and want our numbers to go up. So what happened to the numbers? This is in the 80s, 87. So the numbers went down. What happened to those jobs in that industry? Technology. Those jobs were outsourced. Mainly because the working force here decided we do not want to work. We want money, we want jobs, but we largely don't want to work. So these corporations use that as their incentive to outsource the work. So we really don't have anyone making for us. So we must do as we must. And that is to make sure that we are productive in our own self and place, our homes and our community. And we must do it to show corporations that they don't own us. They don't own the damn planet, land and labor. We have to show them that this place we call Earth is more viable than any job we can get. And matter of fact, that's our job, to make sure we safeguard our home.
I think the benefit, one of the biggest benefits of Trump being president, that everybody's aware, the whole country's watching what you guys are doing. And they're watching his policy, watching everything he's doing, and they're not just leaving it into the hands of politicians. So we'll see in 2018, 2019, what happens in the local elections. So a lot of the Republicans will sign off on the tax cut.
But that's what
Right.
I'm saying. You said that we elect the people who then make the
That's correct.
decisions.
That's
so
So who
how
do we
does
elect?
right, and
But
how does the
I think
community
the first thing-
mobilize to put someone there that can possibly affect change and it not be lip service against, the small man against this big behemoth? How do we really begin to get bite-sized?
You have to learn things that we don't know. And we are told things that are not true. And I don't mean to play the violin. We're told things that are not true. I just wrote an article on about affordable housing. The biggest affordable housing initiative, the biggest, it's more than half of all the affordable housing. So you think of affordable housing, I have a brother who we don't get along. He's a police captain. We don't get along. So he says, well, I think affordable housing is horrible. I go, well, let me ask you something. You own a house. The interest on his mortgage is deductible. That's the largest affordable housing initiative in the country. More than half of grandmas can't afford an apartment, more than anything. So it's crazy because what happens is, in affordable housing, I hate to go back to this. Remember a minute ago I talked about making the land more productive, makes the land rent go up? So right now, our liberals and our conservatives, by the way, will say, okay, we're going to do affordable housing. And people are kind. They go, yeah, we need affordable housing. So what they do is they say to the landowner, developer, we want to entice you to build affordable housing. So instead of building those, I'm going to oversimplify. Instead of building, the zoning says you can build 10 units. We're going to let you build 15. So by physics, you're making the land rent go up because you're making more apartments on that land. So the seller of the land, developer, gets more money for that. He gets a tax abatement for 40 years, no property tax, still gets fire protection, garbage. So somebody else is paying that tax because those fees will run up, right? And the middle-class taxpayer is paying the affordable initiative on a artificially increased land. So I call for, and I went to the assemblyman, they go, oh, you can't do that, there are rules. I said that the additional units should pay for the subsidy. If I can build 5 extra units instead of 10, those 5 units should pay the subsidy, no tax, and pay the tax. Things like that. We have to learn the physics of how things work. You can't depend on other people. We have to figure out how they work. That's one thing. We're lazy. So if I talk to my brother again, I'll bring him up again the last time, he'll say subsidies are horrible. But I think the police subsidy is good, the army, military subsidy is good, the roads are good. So why are those communistic things good? But you know, why is not healthcare insurance, funneling it through an insurance company? Why not just healthcare? You're sick, it's covered. Why do we have to now make the insurance company make $12 billion a year on our healthcare system? So if I may say one thing, because I'm on it and then I'll let go. One thing that we talk about the Trump tax plan is that, and I'm going back to land, because remember, we are land-based creatures. So we should look at that very seriously. That land rent is ours. Now, land includes natural resources. So you may have heard, I was working and I heard somebody's TV say, clean coal. Well, that's an oxymoron to begin with, but let's make believe it's okay, because that's not the point. They don't want to pay, the coal industry people don't want to pay more money for the land leases to extract the coal. Hence, they want to receive the coal at below market, right? The coal is rent because it's land. So they're attacking, this is the public domain. Those are federal lands. So they're, once again, like they did when they came here and stole the land, they're stealing the coal. And they're going to charge them. They'll probably get a tax break. Or, in fact, they're getting a tax break because they're going to add that onto their profit and they're not going to pay tax on it. But they'll pay, not only will they charge us fair market rate, there will be some government official that says we got to use coal, like we use oil.
I think that's $20,000.
That's what's happening, that's the tax thing. So they won't pay tax on that extra. They'll say, well, we made all this profit because we're good businessmen. They are stealing it from us, and that coal, if we should use it, should pay for affordable housing, should pay for Medicare, should pay for things because it belongs to the public.
I just think
So that's it.
I just think at $20,000 foot level, there was a lot of stimulus from the Federal Reserve during the Obama administration. I'm talking like $25, $30 trillion. And I think to the investor class, I think Trump's just cutting taxes to make sure they keep it. That's basically, I think it's going to lead to more inequality, more hoarding of the cash. And economists, the first year economics students tell you that's the last thing you should be doing, putting money into the hands of these people because they're just going to hoard it, they're not going to spend it.
So when you talk about privatization, right?
Yes.
How does it? Can we kind of unpack that some more? How that works? How these guys get the type of leverage that they have?
Yeah.
Why our politicians
I can use an
dance
example.
with them the way they do?
Remember Michael Young? He was the son of Andrew Young. Andrew Young was the ambassador to the UN under Carter. Okay.
Yeah.
So Michael Young was the head of the FCC. He gave out tickets for people to bid on the radio waves. People bid very low for those radio waves. You know, radio, Spectrum, Time Warner, they pay a big bill, but they're not paying anything. So the politicians set it up already. So this guy's the head of the FCC. He says, okay, we're gonna have an auction. $100, okay, you got this dimension of radio waves. It's the public domain. In other words, when we talk about taxing the rich, we're missing a point. We should tax unearned income. So nobody made the radio waves, right? Their capital maybe refined it. But if you take your capital and put it in a bank, what are you getting, 1%, 2%? So why should that guy get 25% interest on his capital? He's not. He's adding the unearned income of the radio waves, or the coal, or the oil, or some resource that was stolen, or we call it locational advantage in real estate. In the colloquial, they say location, location, location. Right? You buy next to the ocean. You didn't make that ocean, but you're going to have a higher rent because it's by the ocean. Likewise, if you're by a population center, you want retail. You didn't make that. Those people made that. So it's unearned income. So if I build a building, I built the building, right? I got to maintain it. I should get rent for that. That's really interest. So when you pay rent on your apartment, you're not really paying rent. You're paying part rent, which is for the land use, and part interest because the building is fixed capital, right?
Okay.
So it's set up that way. It's already set up that way. So that's why it's important to look, you know, I just said something, I didn't invent it, I just read a couple extra books. You know, but it makes sense. Does it make sense what I say? It's boring, and we don't want to read it, but we should find these things out because it's the mechanisms that we can understand. It's not a wazoo. They want to know about derivatives. They want to know all this stuff. It's quite simple. The land, it's shit for everybody. Every monotheistic religion, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, the earth is for everybody. But that's the earth unrefined. Once you use it, you make something out of it, then it's yours. But you have to pay for that thing that you took. The carpenter pays for the tree to make that door. Then he can sell you the door or whatever, you know. So that's what we have to learn, I think, very much.
Okay. Well, is there any response to the issue that we're discussing right now from the audience? All right. Do you have any questions or any issues that you want to raise that we might expand upon?
Just in terms of...
Please introduce yourself.
Yes,
Just introduce at least your first name.
okay, I'm James. I just became acquainted with Wuyi's program probably about 3 years ago. Spoken, met Ralph Baker, and I've listened to WBAI for decades now, surprisingly. But this is the second installment of this forum that I've come across. And I'm just very interested in terms of the land use. Something that's also notable in the Trump era is the talk of infrastructure. And I've looked over years at the role of railroads in the way that the country is sort of unfolded and developed. And it's very notable that we have these issues now with Amtrak, MTA supposedly magically can't work, but every place that you have you have subway infrastructure built up, the real estate is going through the roof. So how is it that there's no money to pay for the railroads? But and also it was very interesting in history to find out that even time, the notion of time initially, before we had any standards programs in nuclear physics to discern the time segments, it was the railroads that set the time standard. So I was just interested in how infrastructure might work in the land use picture.
Well, you're the land bureau, perhaps you can ask them.
Well, I can tell you that if we could just look at one aspect of what you're saying, and I'll just expand it slightly, if you don't mind. If we look at the Hudson River, and this was under the Clintons, no relation to Bill. DeWitt Clinton, the Clintons were large landowners. They owned millions of acres in New York. They mapped out the Erie Canal, which connected the New York Harbor up the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. All those Great Lakes, okay, they pretty much go pretty far west. And the idea was that New York was going to be an independent country after the Revolution. And they had the Deepwater Harbor, so they were going to take the exports from Europe and funnel them up the Erie Canal and get to the breadbasket of the United States. The Great Lakes, if they were laid out shallow, would cover the whole continent. So that's you look at a map of the Great Lakes, you go way over past Michigan, Wisconsin, all those places. So anyway, that was the first thing. So they had that, and the people that owned the land on there, of course, were privy to the idea that there was going to be money made on land on that canal. Fast forward, they built the railroads. And the railroads, J.D. Rockefeller was big on the railroads. It's called vertical integration. Vertical integration is, let's say I own the oil, and I use the trains. So I vertically integrate the trains into my business. Then I own the steel that does the well drilling. I own everything. If I make shoes, I own the farms that grow the steer. I own the tanneries. It's called vertical integration. In fact, the Rockefeller opened Chase. They vertically integrated Chase Bank and the Fed into their operation. So the railroad, it was crooked to begin with because they would pay people or they would have investors, so they'd make the railroad veer off. Say, well, we're gonna make a little town over here, you know, it'd be worth more money to rent a little more. Because remember, we're taking farmland, we make a town out of it, so that makes the rent more productive and the rent goes up. It's all simple, I'm repeating myself, but it happens in every case. It's the land speculation, right? So then, if you fast forward again, they built the New York State Thruway. So first they had 17, old 17 went up to all those little villages, Wurtsboro. When they built the New York State Thruway, it cost $400 million. And the property on the exit ramps in the aggregate went up $800 million. So who made the benefit from it? I'm telling you, it's because now they got retail, people pulling off the highway, right? So it's all part of that mechanism. The trains don't work. They never were meant to work. They were meant to extrapolate or extract wealth out of people. It's unearning.
I think
We need trains. Don't get me wrong. If you go to Paris, the trains are go to Tokyo. So here's another caveat I would like to ask you. I go to the subway, use the subway, and I can watch the clocks to tell me when the train's coming, and they're never right. It might say 16 minutes, and then when it's down to 1 minute, it goes 9 minutes. And then maybe the wrong train comes. So I wonder who get paid for that. It's like treating that liver ailment with a dermatologist. You can't modernize the train system by putting in countdown computers. You got to fix the tracks, make the service. In Tokyo, if you go to Tokyo, they have a little piece of paper that tells you the schedule, and they're on time and clean. So that's all corrupt. The whole thing is corrupt. It's been the land usurpation and labor usurpation was the start of this country, and it continues. That's the thing to focus on. Don't cry the blues about it. Don't complain about it. Just know that that's so. That's how you can do it. You got to look at the system we have and just say, that's what we have. Don't be pissed off about it. Don't be not pissed off about it. Notice what we have, then see what we can do about it. That's the way to do around it. But if we don't look at what we have, we're never going to get there.
I think both parties can agree when they invest in infrastructure. Then it's going to come down to whether it's going to be states doing it or some public-private partnership. And Trump's talking about some public-private partnership, which means that he's going to get some private organizations to bid this hand in the land, and they invest in infrastructure and improve it and charge us a toll. So then you got, when you're talking about privatizing public land, and which is, I don't think there's a terrible idea.
Let's, for a moment, now that you raise the issue of private-public partnerships, right? Let's remember Puerto Rico for a moment. After the storm, the crisis in Puerto Rico, and the near refusal of the Trump administration to invest in Puerto Rico, while at the same time, it looks like private investors are swarming into Puerto Rico, right? That's what Naomi Klein calls disaster capitalism. They wait for some disaster to happen, or sometimes even trigger issues.
They give them pictures of dead presidents for land, and they can do whatever they want with it, because that's the sacrament, that's the holy thing. It's a feudal system that we're living in.
You were going to say something? Yeah. So I'm going to try to get at it like this. What the Bitcoin people were able to do, right? And the big behemoths couldn't stop it, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
So why can't we as people, is there a way for us to formulate something that the bohemians can't stop, that can really benefit us as the basic, kind of like the proletariat, the working class, basically, which is the foundation to stop being manipulated and deceived and kind of carrots dangled? Is there something that we can do collectively to actually move on that and have that big boat have to turn?
Well, I think there are things we can do, but they're not the things that bring about the immediate result. Learning first, figure out what we have. For example, sugar was predicated on stealing land and slavery. It was one of the worst. The slaves that went to Haiti, 30 days life expectancy. So don't use sugar. Eliminate sugar, not your vote. Your vote isn't for the guy you vote for. Your vote is how you live. No smoking. Slaves made those cigarettes. The same people own those companies. no cigarettes, no big cars, no sugar. Let's start with that. And it sounds silly, but that's your vote, how you live. You know, and if you say, well, I have a cousin that owns 300 acres, he's a farmer, right-wing conservative, and he's like, well, I don't like any subsidies, but I like the farm bill. It's a subsidy. So we have to look at where we might compromise our ethics if it benefits us. We really have to do that. It's how we live. That's the first vote. That's the first step. Learning, voting by not doing things that benefit those institutions that we can't stand.
So now, if you say learning, then I gotta ask you about the condition of the mind that is to learn.
I grew up Irish Catholic, man.
I hear you.
So,
But I'm saying,
yeah,
you heard what you said.
I
So
heard what you said.
inevitably,
Gotta break out.
we know, right, so the next question becomes, how do we undo this conditioning? And how do you get a person in a place of clarity that they can understand that what they are doing is actually of greater harm to them than good? How do we do that when the behemoth is playing smoke and mirrors with you in the first place and shoving it down your throat? So how do we undo that?
Turn the TV off. Man, sorry.
No, keep talking. We're having a conversation here.
No.
I love it. Keep
We don't,
speaking.
we can't believe what they're telling us.
Okay, I'm listening.
You can't believe what they're telling us.
Right.
It's not true.
Exactly.
For example, I'll give you a couple of snippets if I might.
Sure.
Hitler got out.
Mm-hmm.
He traded the bomb and helicopters and NASA, the rocket, our space program came out of the SS scientists.
Mm.
Okay, study the Treaty of Versailles. I don't want to get into too much.
Right.
He got out. So here's a scenario. Hitler gave the bomb and made a deal with the OSS, the CIA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And got to Argentina, or he committed suicide and they burned the bodies.
Mm.
Okay, number one. J.D. Rockefeller invested in Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
He wanted to sell oil. Okay, so we're not told how big these things are. I don't want to get into the Illuminati, and all that, but we can't believe what they tell us. We have to look at. So it's just going to sound silly, but there's the biggest first step I ever took was self-observation.
Mm-hmm.
So look at yourself. So let me explain something what I mean by that. What I don't hear very well. I have a hearing impairment, and I was telling this gentleman and that gentleman before. I probably would be legally deaf. I don't hear. But in the old days when I grew up, it's he's deaf. That means he is that, right? Now I get to say, I have a hearing impairment. It's something in my pocket. It's little. You see what I'm saying? So it's like you observe yourself. And when you observe yourself, you expand. And when you expand, you can start to make choices. That doesn't represent me. But right now we don't look at it that way. We like the comfort of things. We like comfort in the familiarity with things. And I think that, I don't mean to get over philosophical, but we have to start observing ourselves. Plato and Socrates said, a life that you don't observe is not worth living. So you observe yourself. So when you get angry at something, make like there's somebody else looking at you. Notice your emotions. Notice the things you go for. But certainly give up those things that are evil, sugar, tobacco, that aren't good for you, and they're made by institutions that are evil.
Now, if you're really hungry, right?
Yeah.
You're really hungry. You're just hungry as hell. How well do you think you'll be able to observe yourself?
If I'm really hungry, I can observe my hunger. If I really have to eat, or if it's...
I'm saying the unenlightened mind,
well, you don't even have to
whose
be enlightened.
condition that is hungry, what is going to happen?
What's going
Doesn't
to
have the wherewithal to be able to slow it down, turn his eyes inward, and what amounts to basically living in a war zone. Is he able to do
Yo,
that?
Scott.
He is able to do that, and they just was an
Say again?
interesting...
Hang
Yo,
on.
Scott, it's not gonna be televised. It ain't for everyone, man. You move with the numbers that you have. You can't worry about everyone, man. You gotta make
Depends
sure
on how
you're
hungry.
on those who are ready to make the move.
Okay.
Right, so I mean, to his point, I mean, like, I was, about a year ago, when Bernie Sanders was running for president, I was talking to some guys on the block, and all we're doing is taking these conversations happening on the block, in the barbershops, putting them in town forum.
Okay.
And we're talking, and then she told me that The New York Washington Post had ran 25 consecutive negative articles about Bernie Sanders. And it was, everything he said was negative. It was like, if you didn't know Bernie Sanders, you thought he was black. You didn't know.
I hear
I never seen anybody. It was everything he said. Everything he said was every speech he made. The Washington Post had a problem with it. We can't let these institutions. And Bernie Sanders was a trailblazer. To me, he was the guy. He had a populist message that resonated with the public. He was the guy who probably should have been the Democratic.
He should have been.
But we can't let the media and these institutions undermine our trailblazers.
Right.
So in history, when was the last time someone was able to galvanize the people, raise their self-esteem, and have them unabashedly move from one position in life to another, fighting the Goliath and effectively chopping Goliath off at the
It was
knee?
1930.
When was the last time?
Gandhi.
It was 1930.
Okay, he said Gandhi.
It
You
was,
said 1930.
It was FDR. This happened. This is nothing new. This happened in the 1930s.
Okay, expand on that. So FDR did what?
So in
The people did what? And what was the result?
So in the 1930s, this financial crisis that happened in 2008, 2009, happened in the 1930s. It was a stock market crash. And what these banks were doing, they were commercial banks and investment banks.
Yeah.
Commercial banks, what a commercial bank would do is go invest in railroad bonds or go buy bonds in Puerto Rico, 20% interest rate. The bonds would go bad. Instead of the bank taking a loss, the bank would package the bonds and sell them to the securities arm to you and me. So these bonds are good. And so the public thought the bonds were good because it's coming from the securities company. They didn't know that it was a conflict of interest because their parent company was fobbing off bad loans onto the public. They had a hearing. We actually looked at these banks' behavior, and FDR broke the banks up. He broke them up. Said no more. Herbert Hoover was president at the time. People blamed him for the crash and the fact that he was protecting these bankers. And so he came to the idea to break the banks up. He didn't get elected. FDR actually got elected. He followed through on what Herbert Hoover had proposed. And the guys, Carter Glass and Henry Steagall, actually wrote the laws called the Glass-Steagall Act. And Carter Glass is from Lynchburg, Virginia. Brilliant guy. He's one of the guys who's crossed to the Federal Reserve. And so he said that a banker in his state tried to marry a white woman and they lynched him. That's how much they hated bankers in 1930. It's a joke. It's a joke.
Okay.
But my point is, so in the 1990s, in the mid-90s, these guys don't know Newt Gingrich. Newt Gingrich, Bill Clinton had become president, and they controlled the Democrats controlled the House and the Senate, and the Republicans just kept blasting about Clinton and about welfare and about affirmative action. That's what was hurting the country. Really, Wall Street was a Wall Street debacle, and we need to get rid of these regulations. And we need to repeal Glass-Steagall. The act that FDR put in place, and FDR came from the money class. He was rich. He was hated. So we look back on him fondly now, but he was hated when he was alive. You got these politicians who want to be popular. History's not going to remember these people. Running around simping and trying to be everybody's buddy. Nobody can remember these people. So the Republicans pushed to have the Glass-Steagall repealed. I'm walking around my house, talking to myself, cursing under my breath like these people crazy. So the Republicans control the House and the Senate, and whatever Newt Gingrich said, it's like the Pied Piper. People believed it. And so the banks had the most lobbying dollars spent in Washington back then was spent from banks, lobbying to Gingrich and these politicians to repeal Glass-Steagall. This is just the facts. They repealed Glass-Steagall in 1998. So 60 years Glass-Steagall stood, no more crisis like that on Wall Street. They repealed Glass-Steagall in 1998. So from 1932 to 1998, there was no problem. They repealed in 1998. What happened in 2007? All hell broke loose. When they repealed it, these banks started betting their own capital again. And when the investments went bad, they fobbed them off on unsuspecting line. It was the exact playbook from the 1930s.
Right.
And when Obama came off, he gonna clean this up. He protected these guys. No, he had a pulpit to break these banks up, just like FDR. Go back to Glass-Steagall, send these people to jail. He didn't do it. He and Eric Holder didn't do anything. That's all. I'm not.
But
Don't worry.
they did restore Glass-Steagall to some extent. Maybe not as fully as it was originally, but they did restore Glass-Steagall.
But my point is that FDR was hated among the money
Because
side.
he
He
did
stood
the
tall.
opposite of
He stood tall from
Let's-
protecting.
Let's hear from, especially the ladies, now that we have them in the house.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. 1,000%.
Yeah, and who wants to?
If you want to speak.
Hands up in the back.
Well, no, I think this is a great point. Though.
If I just want to
We can,
Well, during this time, though, in this time that we are living in, I do believe that a level of extra sensitivity is called for.
Absolutely.
And
Me
this
too.
is not patronizing at all, and you don't have to speak if you don't want to.
But
And I am not saying, you know, somebody said to me the other day, they said, man, you know, I feel so much compassion for the people of my country, the people of color. I think they should speak first. So in no way, shape, or form is that, because that's just as misogynist. So what I'm saying to you is that, and in the interest of a level playing field, I'm listening if you care to speak.
Well, they can't all. They can't all raise their hand at the same time.
Well, we see, but
Y'all can't just all jump up and start
But
screaming.
as I said,
I guess I wanna know what you guys think about with yesterday, with the stock market crashing. Like, do you think that that's a sign of what's to come, or do you just think that it was a bad day? Like, what do you guys think?
Well, it's a good question because the government had a policy of actually buying stocks. The stock market was, if you look at the actual earnings of these companies, they haven't really been that strong. We get uneven over the past 7, 8 years. Every time the stock market was about to go down, the Federal Reserve buy more stocks and prop it back up. So they're propping up the stock market and giving you this illusion of progress. It's just something what y'all would call stunting for the brand. Stunting for the brand. And so now, see what's happening now, and I said this on Twitter to somebody, what's happening now is the Federal Reserve, what they did, they call it quantitative easing. All they did was spend $5 trillion to buy bonds and drive down rates to record low levels and prop up asset prices. Bonds, real estate, and stocks, okay? Now they're starting talking about unwinding it. They tapered it in the second quarter of 2014. When they tapered it, immediately rail traffic started declining. Commodity prices started declining. So it tells you it's all stimulus induced. It was all stimulus, it wasn't real economic growth. And so now the government, the Federal Reserve is talking about unwinding it. That means they're gonna sell these bonds, this $4.5 trillion bonds, and they price sell them down to like maybe 900 billion, which is a normalized level. So when they sell the bonds, the prices go down, and the yield goes up. So interest rates go up. And so what's the problem with the stock market over the years is that people can't earn income on bonds, zero interest rates. Only way to earn money is through stocks. So there's no competition for the stock market. So now when rates go up, say mortgage rates go up, that means housing may decline a little bit. It also means that now you have competition for stocks. So people can maybe earn 2.5%, 3%. They couldn't earn 10 years ago. Then why would you invest in stocks at Dow at 26,000? It's all stimulus induced when you earn 3% on bonds. So that's what's the problem. So people are trying to get out of it. And another thing is that you have some companies that have taken on, because interest rate is so low, they never get this low in a lifetime. It encourages them to take on risk. Go and make acquisitions, buy back stocks with debt, cheap debt. The problem is that the debt has to be repaid. Not so cheap, it has to be repaid. So now you got a lot of companies that are not that strong financially. They have all this debt that they can't pay back. And there's landmines in the stock market. And they're going to start materializing over the next couple of years. So the Federal Reserve, if they fully unwind this balance sheet, all hell gonna break loose. You're going to see rates go up, you're going to see stock market go down. So I think I was telling somebody on Twitter, I kept talking about the statues down south, the Confederate flags and statues. And I just said, like, I've been there for 50 years, I'm from Virginia. The mainstream media never asked me anything about a statue, what I thought about a statue. Why they care so much now? Why they care about statue now? What's happening now? When they unwind this balance sheet, and a lot of them telling them for the last 8 or 9 years, we spurring the economy, they're not going to spurring the economy, they're spurring their donors. And people just take their word for it. When people in the rest of the country realize it's a lie, all hell gonna break loose. And people they may tear this country all hell, and they should. I can't think of a better reason why they should tear this country up. You print your money and give it to your donors. So my only point is that when I was a kid, I was living this. When I was a kid,
See that right there?
Look, when I was a kid, like
We're gonna work through it.
yeah, when I was a kid,
Then you might have to turn the camera off. Did you do know that too?
I'm saying you see something so strong, right?
No, but come on.
You see something so strong, right?
Absolutely.
Around. And so my problem, when I was a kid, I was never a bad kid. The only problem I had was a ball. Something like football, baseball.
That's
I was
what
hard-headed.
sports.
I'd play the ball in the house, in the windows, and break everything. And so
your parents.
So you break something, and 9 a.m. my mother get home at 5:30 and wait around.
Beat you.
And that's the worst part. So she get home and she take that belt out, and all of a sudden I want to talk about Beauregard, and I want to talk about Robert E. Lee, and I want to talk about
Distract.
I want to talk about Jefferson Davis.
Sure.
And she would listen to it for a little while, and you still don't get this belt.
So distract.
So like, no, my point is that when the government, the Federal Reserve is unwinding this balance sheet, and you're seeing interest rates spike, and people getting afraid that now the stock market is going to compete with the bond market.
Okay, now, one second. Because I'm trying to integrate people. You said Gandhi, right? So now, how make that relevant to us today, right now, considering the landscape?
Okay, well, there's certain things you have to transcend. And those, I think, are you familiar with Abraham Maslow?
No.
Is anybody familiar with Abraham Maslow? It's going to be obvious, but it's very deep. He merged philosophy with business. He said human beings have a hierarchy of needs: air, water, food, clothing, shelter, relationships, and so on and so forth. So you want to socialize with people, but you're not really worried about your next vacation if you can't catch your breath.